Hey, welcome students. Hey, we're going to talk about our last part of Unit 1, talking about self-esteem, mental health, and specifically depression, and then dealing with stress, and finishing up our unit with coping mechanisms, coping skills, especially when we deal with death and dying, and then suicide. So we'll start off with self-esteem. I put on Schoology a discussion with Montel Williams with a video that I would like for you to watch and comment on. Um, Quick 50-second video just talking about how you can build self-esteem. So first of all, what is self-esteem? That's a measure of how much one values, respects, and feels confident about oneself. You have benefits of high self-esteem. Obviously, you're going to increase respect, not only for yourself, but for others. Those goals we talked about last week, have the ability to reach those. And if you don't reach them, you have that ability to bounce back or figure out new ways to reach those goals. You have that willingness to try it, and you have feelings of value, again, not only for yourself, but also for others. Risk of low self-esteem, you think about the opposite: disrespect of self and others, negative thinking, uh, maybe possibly giving into peer pressure. And if you have low self-esteem, you're at a higher risk for the number one mental health disorder, which is depression. How can you improve your self-esteem? Obviously, positive self-talk. That's something we do, or I do as a football coach, as a person. Start every day looking in the mirror, um, having that self-concept that we're going to have a good day. It's just a way of coaching yourself about your own self-worth. Number two, act with integrity. What I characterize as integrity is doing what's right when nobody's watching you. When you're doing those things, there's no reason to feel bad about yourself. Probably a big one here is choose supportive friends, people that accept you for you. And then last thing is accept yourself. That's what makes the world go round. Everybody is different, and if we can accept ourselves, that's a big start to having high self-esteem. From there, I've talked about in the past communication skills and things like that. I'm not going to hit on that this time, but I want to get into mental health and emotional health, two of our six health components. Mental health, that's a state of mental well-being which one can cope with the demands of daily life, and that's a huge word, even though it's a four-letter word. Cope is something that we have to deal with no matter what age and all facets of life. Doesn't matter who you are. People with strong mental health, they have that sense of control. They always have the ability to endure failures and frustrations. They see events positively, like, with this pandemic that we're having. People with strong mental health see the positives, even though it's a hard time. And then they have the ability to express their emotions in a healthy way. And emotions are extremely important in life because that helps you and helps others see how you really feel and helps you understand how you really feel. And we can do this all with, if you take sociology with Coach Anselman, he'll talk about self-actualization, the achievement of the person, or the best of the person can be. And with self-actualization, they have a pyramid where level one, you have to have your basic needs, water, shelter, and then, probably one of the bigger ones is love. Everybody wants to feel loved and feel cared for. How you express your emotions, again, emotions are perfectly normal. Don't feel wrong by having certain emotions, but emotions are a feeling that's produced in a response to a life experience. I'm sure everybody has experienced anger, disappointment. Um, One of them that we talk about is guilt. And if you go back to it, the word integrity, people that do the right things when nobody's watching, most of the time that guilty emotion never happens for them. But how do you how do you manage those emotions? Talk it out, communicate, be creative, have a hobby, exercise. Those things are extremely important when managing emotions. Probably one of the biggest things with me when I get upset, I'm to myself, and maybe that's not the best way of handling emotion. I keep comments to myself, um, but that's just one way that I do it. And then the last thing with managing emotions is defense mechanisms. That's just the unconscious starter behavior to help you avoid an unpleasant emotion. There's quite a few defense mechanisms: sublimation, blaming, um, daydreaming. When you're in the classroom and you don't like hearing what the teacher says, a lot of people daydream. They think about other things, which that's fine. That's a natural thing that you do to block certain things. Again, those are defense mechanisms. I asked you to look up some mental disorders, and hopefully you did that because there's a lot of mental disorders out there. And um, the definition for mental disorders, what are they? That's an illness. It's a disease that affects a person's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Like I told you, depression is the number one mental health disorder. And if we need to understand that, because when we talk about suicide, depression is one of the main reasons people commit suicide. So we got to understand people will get depressed in life by things that happen, but people with strong mental health will bounce back quickly. Um, the book that I've read talks about three things that you can do when you know you're having depression: is face the problem. What is that problem? Identifying it, and then taking action to it. Um, a couple other mental health disorders I'm going to just briefly talk about. Um, One of them is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. A lot of people have it. I feel at times as an adult, I have the adult version of it. And then another big disorder that people have is anxiety disorder, and especially during this pandemic time, um, there's a lot of anxious people, and it's all right to be anxious, but when it controls your life, that turns into that anxiety, and then with anxiety, sometimes that turns into a major mental health disorder, and could lead to depression. What causes mental health disorders? There's a variety of things. Um, you know, one thing that we'll talk about here in a couple of weeks is in our unit 2 is alcohol and drugs, and people that have a tendency to be addicted to alcohol and drugs tend to have some mental health disorders or develop mental health disorders. Certain things in life that happen to you could cause a mental health disorder. Sometimes um, you might be born with certain mental health disorders, um, but how you have to manage those things, and people can get help when they have a mental health disorder. um, you know Psychotherapy, group therapy, medication. If you talk about ADHD, a lot of kids take certain medications for that. And we'll talk about that in unit 2, how some of those medications can, for people that do not need it, can cause addiction issues. Handling stress in your life. What causes you stress? Probably right now, staying at home, doing the stay at home order could cause you some stress. But it's the body's and mind's response to demand, and those demands are called stressors. Um, any situation that puts a demand on the body or mind. So that I break it down into 5 different categories of stressors. You have environmental stressors, pollution, poverty, crowding, natural disasters. We've had some, or the southern part of our country has had some severe weather, biological stressors, illnesses, disabilities, injuries, thinking stressors, mental challenges. Certain classes that you'll take in high school are definitely a thinking stressor. Behavioral stressors, lack of sleep, lack of exercise, addictions like tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. And then the last one's life change stressors: a death, marriage, divorce, changing location. I'm sure some people have moved into Olney, and it's definitely a stress in your life. I remember in 8th grade, my dad was wanting to possibly take a job in Indianapolis, and definitely it was a stress on our family. I probably made a lot of the stress because I didn't want to move from my friends, and you know, right now you look back on it, it was good, but maybe I missed out on some opportunities that I would have had going to a bigger school than I did at Edwards County. Um, Again, your body handles stress in different ways. Sometimes you use those defense mechanisms. One defense mechanism is the fight or flight response. Your body produces adrenaline. The scientific term is epinephrine. And stress can be categorized into two things: positive stress, negative stress. Positive stress, they call it eustress. It makes you light, alert, lively, confident, and in control. And then negative stress, which this is where people, if they don't handle it, can become sick. It's called distress. And your body is naturally, when it can't handle things anymore, it's going to make sure you recognize it, and you usually get sick by it, have headaches. Those things happen. You have a cut on your arm, and the cut becomes red and hot. I mean, there's an infection. The body's telling you that you need to take care of this. So, um, you know, stress, we think most of the time is a negative, as a distress, but it can be positive, um, called eustress. How do you deal with stress? A lot like emotions. Um, Exercise regularly, rest is important, eat right, have that good balanced diet, learn to relax, breathing exercise, tension release exercises. If my wife loves to give massages, that relaxes her. For me, I don't like people touching me. That stresses me out. Breathing exercises. I remember in playing sports in high school, I get to the free throw line, I take a deep breath. I get in the batter's box, take a deep breath. And then you talk about, there's a time in a woman's life um, when they're going through pregnancy. The doctor tells them to, breathe. The breathing helps the person, helps the mother get through the birthing process. Focuses on their breathing versus focusing on the baby. Um, you build resiliency. One way to build resiliency is it's called assets. Those are things you're good at, and that's why I always say, when you're going through tough times or rough times, or you're stressed out, always go back to something you're good at. And then the last thing goes back to self-esteem. Change your attitude. Use that positive self-talk. Be confident about yourself. And then the last one's, don't worry about things that you cannot control. And I guess there is one more: managing your time will help you deal with stress. The last segment's talking about coping with loss. Um, everybody's gonna deal with death and dying at some point. Hopefully, you haven't had anybody real close to you pass away, but when that does happen, there is a process they call the grieving process. Number one, what is grieve? That's to express deep sadness because of a loss. There's 5 stages to the grieving process: denial, which is a defense mechanism, not believing it happened; anger, which we know is an emotion; stage 3 is bargaining. I'm sure we've done that with mom, dad, guardian, or with a teacher. Hey, if you let me do this, I'll do this for you. We do that a lot when people pass away. And then stage 4 is depression, we know, which is the number one mental health disorder. And then the last stage is acceptance. We don't forget about the loss, but we accepted that it happened. And then this is a tough thing to talk about, and I'll have a video. I'll tag a video onto this discussion that helps talk about suicide, and then I'll have a link. It's called the Jason Foundation, where you can get some more information about warning signs and things that you can do when you know somebody that's thinking about suicide, actions that you can take. But suicide, the act that the act of intentionally taking one's own life, why do you think the suicide rate for teenagers are high? Just take a minute to think about that. With teens, they're constantly changing physically, emotionally, mentally. And then when you add stress or an impact in their life, sometimes teens think about, hey, I'll end it right now. They're reactionary. They don't think about the future. Um, and then there are warning signs. Again, depression is a major warning sign, that hopeless feeling, withdrawing from family and friends, neglecting basic needs, experiencing loss of energy, taking more risk, using alcohol and drugs, giving away personal items. Those are just some warning signs. I'm not saying that if a person's giving you something, they're going to kill themselves, but I'm sure there'll be other signs that you could recognize if they're having those issues. Probably my last statement on suicide is don't joke about it. I know we're not in the hallways right now. I've heard it in the hallways before. Hey, I just rather kill myself, and they're quote joking about it. Don't do those things. If somebody does, um, please talk to them about it. And if you feel like there is a need, we do have help here at school that we can at least guide you in the right way to maybe help that student, or if you're a student that's thinking about it, make sure you communicate that so we can get you help. Again, you can get on the link, the Jason Foundation link, to help you with more warning signs, things that you can look for when people are suicidal. And then there is a YouTube video that I'll show. It just talks about some students out in Colorado. And then again, watch that first self-esteem video that I have that you can discuss on. Um, so hopefully you got everything answered on your Unit 1 key topics. When you're done with those, please share those, and have a good week this week.